11 is your local election headquarters, and it does not get more local than this election cycle with the city council and some DA races, the most notable contest on the ballot this year. Admittedly, not the most exciting year, but important nonetheless. Local elections matter, so to break down the key races and overall picture of Election Day, I'm joined now by Katie Honan and Gwynne Hogan. Honan and Hogan from the city. It's like a law firm. Great to have both of you here.
Irish law firm.
Yes, exactly. So before we get into individual races, let's talk about the city council overall, right? Because Democrats control 45 of the 51 seats. So let me talk to you, Katie, first. Do you believe there's going to be any kind of shift here?
I think there could be in some seats that I know Gwynne and I can discuss. Like some of the races, there's been a real shift to maybe more purple district. I think I even saw this. We saw this last year with Governor Hochul. It was a lot closer than some people thought against Lee Zeldin, and you saw that really shake out in certain council districts. So I know there are certain parts across the city, whether they're disillusioned with the Democratic Party, unhappy with the direction of the city, they want to go a different direction. So that could play out that way.
And so, Gwynne, what are those purple districts, right? Because it all comes down to some of the rezoning and redistricting that played out as well.
So I cover Brooklyn. I can tell you about South Brooklyn, where there are 3 races in particular that we're looking at. There's obviously the race between 2 sitting council members, Justin Brannon and Eric Kagan. There's a race.
Let's start there for 1 second,
okay,
right? Because that's a big race overall. We have both of them on because it really seems to be the one that's heating up. Brannon has a lot to lose here, but Kagan was somebody who was a Democrat and then switched to being a Republican.
Yeah, that's going to be very interesting to watch. I mean, Justin Brannon has a fundraising edge over Eric Kagan. I've been out at poll sites this week. Early voting has been happening. It's been pretty slow, voters trickling in. I've talked to voters there and in Coney Island, right? Because Coney Island is a place that Eric Kagan currently represents, and Justin Brannon has no, footing there historically. And the same for Bay Ridge for Eric Kagan. It's too, obviously, I don't want to predict who's going to win, but it has been interesting. I have heard anger from Democrats that their counselor switched parties midterm.
And do you have thoughts on this one?
I think Gwynne really explained it well. I know Brandon got Bernie Sanders' endorsement. I don't know how that will play out. I think we're going to really have to see. I've heard it'll either be super close or a blowout. Of course, we're not in the prediction game. I wish I was, but it's hard to tell.
Let's talk about Councilmember Ina Vernikov defending her seat against 2 challengers. Between that and her current legal issues, right? She is the one who had the gun in her waistband at a rally. So what's happening in this race?
Allegedly. She was in court yesterday. She didn't have to plead, but she was arraigned on the charge that she brought this gun to a sensitive location. I've also been talking to voters there and trying to figure out sort of if that is having any impact in her district. Obviously, again, we're talking about very few voters overall that are going to turn out into these polls, and Democrats are really hopeful that they can mobilize behind the candidate, Amber Adler, but it's definitely going to be a tough row to hoe against a sitting incumbent. And I talked to voters who were like, yeah, I heard about the gun, but I've seen her clean up trash at this corner, or I've seen her do this, and they are sort of sticking with her. But again, it's too soon to tell exactly.
Right. And then there's Tony Avella trying to get back into the game overall here, challenging Vicky Palladino. So what are his chances here, Katie?
Again, I've spoken to people who they don't know if he can pull it off. He's a known entity in the district. And Vicky Palladino has had a lot of controversies within her district. But again, these are her voters who they elected her in the first place.
Right.
So it's a little bit more conservative in that part of Queens, and whether or not Tony can actually motivate more Democratic voters or just, I guess, motivate behind what could be anger about Vicky Palladino and some of her stances, whether it's about the asylum seeker crisis or other concerns across the city. We will see on Tuesday what happens. There has been, fundraising edges between the two, so we will see who, again, I think the turnout will be, unfortunately, very, very low.
Right, which historically is what plays out here, right? But it seems that also this year in particular, the Asian American vote is certainly one to watch. Why do you see that playing out more so this year?
Well, we've seen that population, citywide growing at greater rates than other populations. And we also know that those voters are increasingly conservative when it comes to education issues like the SHSAT or gifted and talented programs, and also on, public safety, themes of public safety. So, I mean, the newly created Asian Opportunity District in South Brooklyn, the District 43 race, that's sort of interesting because the Democratic candidate, Susan Zhuang, has very similar positions to her Republican counterpart, Ying Tang.
Okay.
So it's not so clear cut between red and blue in that election.
And if it stays Democratic as the council, Adrienne Adams keeps her seat as Speaker.
Yeah, it would have been a Democrat, I think, challenging her if there is a challenge, but we'll see probably after the Somos conference in Puerto Rico
Well, yes.
there's any movement there.
So then overall, right, looking at what happens with the council overall, anything besides the obvious that Mayor Adams should be worried about when it comes to a new city council?
I would like to see the council perhaps, go after him a lot more on certain issues. Obviously, there's been opposition with his right to shelter stance. Mm-hmm. He's tried to veto some of the bills that they then overrode the veto in the council. The council overall is a lot more to the left to Mayor Adams, mm-hmm. right? But in terms of stirring the pot, I know maybe that's the reporter in us. We don't just want controversy, I guess, but it would be interesting to see how they do challenge him, especially as he's facing some concerns about his fundraising and he seems to be a little bit more vulnerable.
Got it. Gwynne and Katie, appreciate you being here. Local elections matter. You do great work over at the city, so I really appreciate you both being here.
Thanks.